The latest from 7 News with Gemma Acton.
What should be the best moment of a surrogacy journey is the most anxiety-inducing tonight. Australian families right now unable to bring their newborns home after the Crete clinic they used was raided by police. Europe Bureau Chief Hugh Whitfeld is keeping across this developing story for us. Hugh, why was the raid carried out?
Gemma, the allegations reported by Greek media are that the clinic at the centre of this was engaged in human trafficking and the illegal adoption of babies. 8 people, including the founder of the clinic, are reported to be have been arrested by Greek authorities. Among the allegations that they were exploiting foreign women as surrogates. Now, even more troubling is that some of the children already born to those surrogates that were in the care of the clinic are now in a Crete hospital under guard. They are essentially the possessions of the Greek government. Some of those children are biologically Australian. They are the children of Australian parents who've been forced to travel overseas to seek surrogacy. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra has released a statement to 7 News saying that DFAT is continuing to provide consular assistance and engage actively with Greek authorities in support of a small number of families with surrogacy arrangements in Greece. We understand that this is a distressing time for impacted families. That is likely to be somewhat of an understatement for some of those families who are reported to be in Greece right now trying to get access to their children. The clinic at the centre of all of this is called Mediterranean Family Institute. It's phone calls to them aren't getting through, but they do have a post on their Facebook page which suggests they were trying to encourage support for the founder of the clinic during a recent court appearance. Now, it's already difficult enough for Australian families who have trouble conceiving or are unable to search out surrogacy in Australia because commercial surrogacy is illegal in Australia, so many of them have to go overseas. In this case, it appears that a number of Australians have gone to Crete to seek assistance and they now are caught up in a nightmare. Gemma.
These are thoroughly disturbing details. Hugh, thank you for the update. This historic moment breaking tonight. India has just landed the first ever spacecraft on the south pole of the moon, doing what Russia tried to and couldn't earlier this week. All previous moon missions have touched down near the lunar equator, but this section is key to the hunt for water. A rover will now be released to go exploring for it. India is only the 4th country to ever complete a soft landing on the moon. Let's go to Grace Fitzgibbon in Sydney, where 2 teenagers are tonight charged over the fire that destroyed a heritage building. Grace, good evening. What are they accused of?
Good evening, Gemma. Police say these 13-year-old boys are responsible for lighting the fire that completely destroyed this 7-storey heritage building in Surrey Hills, causing hundreds of businesses and residents to evacuate and shutting down surrounding streets. 4 teenagers handed themselves into police in the days following the fire and they were thoroughly questioned, but no charges were laid at the time. Now, 3 months on, arson squad detectives have charged these 2 13-year-olds with destroying property worth more than $5,000 by fire and trespassing. One of the boys was also charged with 2 counts of shoplifting from a nearby grocery store on the same day. Gemma, the pair will both face a children's court in October.
Thank you for the update, Grace. Important warning signs for parents tonight as we see a surge in children diagnosed with strep A. Cases are up more than 500%. The bacterial infection often presents like a common cough, but it can be much more serious. If left untreated, it can lead to life-threatening sepsis. Well, be prepared is the message tonight for much of the country ahead of this year's bushfire season. A forecast dry and warm spring is increasing the risk in the lead up to the official start. One of the biggest concerns is high grass and vegetation growth after 3 years of wet La Nina conditions. It sounds counterintuitive at first, mine more to keep emissions lower, but that's exactly what the government's planning to do, digging out the critical minerals needed to make renewables. Political reporter Rob Scott is in Canberra. Rob, good evening. What's the thinking here?
Evening, Gemma. Well, this is all about global warming and limiting its impacts. Of course, we know the key to that is cutting pollution and shifting to cleaner, greener energy. So the intergenerational report, which the Treasurer will release tomorrow, predicts the transition to net zero will have a big impact on our resources sector over the next 40 years. Global action to reduce climate change is predicted to create a huge drop-off in demand for Australian coal, anywhere between 50 and 99%. But it's also forecasting to ramp up the international appetite for critical minerals by around 350%. And Australia has some of the world's biggest reserves of those rare earths. We're talking things like lithium, nickel and zinc, which are all essential ingredients in the production of clean energy technology like electric cars, magnets and batteries.
Our vision for Australia as a renewable energy superpower is about more than simply increasing the mix of renewable energy in our national energy grid. It's about vastly reducing input costs for manufacturing with cheaper power and using clean energy such as green hydrogen to sustain and grow large-scale energy-intensive industry and transport.
So essentially the government says we have just what the world needs at the precise time that it needs it. And as the Resources Minister Madeleine King puts it, the road to net zero runs right through our resources sector, meaning more mining, not less. I know it sounds strange, but I guess it makes sense when you think of it in those terms.
Well,
Gemma.
big rewards if we get this right. Rob, thank you.
Thank you.
A counsellor is assisting police tonight with their investigation into the death of his stepfather on the Gold Coast. We don't know if Ryan Baildon Lumsden is a suspect or witness, but our camera saw him being led away by detectives in a forensic suit. Officers were called to the home after a fight. Extra detectives and justice workers are being sent out to youth crime hotspots across Queensland tonight under a newly announced police task force. It's being deployed to problem areas and predicting which suburbs will be targeted next. The aim, to break the cycle and hone in on serious repeat offenders. The Force's Commissioner says change won't happen overnight, though. The announcement on the same day victims rallied at State Parliament. A public memorial will be held next week for two of the victims of Victoria's fatal mushroom meal. We've learned Don and Gail Patterson were privately laid to rest earlier in the week. The couple died after eating the lunch prepared by their former daughter-in-law, Erin Patterson. Gail's sister passed away too. Her husband remains in hospital waiting for a liver transplant. A family is searching for answers tonight after their teenage son died unexpectedly in his sleep. William Pfeiffer went to bed at his grandparents' house in Adelaide and never woke up. The 14-year-old's parents are waiting for autopsy results, but say he had no worrying symptoms or previous medical history. William is described as funny, kind and quirky, with a heart of gold. Rochelle Brown is in Melbourne, where there are calls tonight to outlaw machetes following a rise in attacks. Rochelle, new laws could be on the way.
Gemma, the state opposition plans to introduce a new bill into Parliament which would see machetes added to the long list of prohibited weapons. It comes after a growing spate of attacks in Melbourne involving machetes and suspected youth crime gangs, including an attack at a train station in Melbourne's West on Monday, where a teenager was threatened by a group of youths in front of dozens of commuters. Now, buying a machete here is relatively easy and inexpensive. At the moment, you can get your hands on them at outdoor adventure shops and online. 7 News managed to obtain one today without any questions asked, but today there are moves for changes for the first time.
There's no place in Victoria for machetes anymore. They're an old tool that's now just a weapon. And the problem with a controlled weapon is you can still import them from interstate and overseas. If it became a prohibited weapon, you could no longer do that.
The state government is yet to respond to the idea, instead saying that the sale of knives to those under aged 18 is prohibited.
Rochelle, thank you. Donald Trump isn't worried that he's skipping the first Republican debate tomorrow. The former US president has a healthy lead in early polling over the 8 candidates who will be there gunning for his old job. It'll be a primetime TV contest. The nominees face the tricky balancing act of standing out from the frontrunner without alienating his hardcore supporter base. Tomorrow marks the start of a decades-long dumping of nuclear wastewater from Japan's disused Fukushima power plant. 540 Olympic-sized pools worth will eventually flow into the Pacific Ocean. The UN atomic watchdog is fine with what's going on, with special treatment systems in place. Hong Kong and Macau, however, are not taking any chances, indefinitely banning seafood imports. At least 26 labourers have fallen to their deaths tonight when a bridge under construction collapsed in India. The metal frame fell into a ravine. Several other workers are feared trapped right now. The Prime Minister saying he's pained by the mishap, offering money to next of kin and the injured. To a fire at a high-rise office block in northern China. Smoke can be seen pouring out of the 26-storey building. Nearly 300 firefighters are fighting the blaze, according to authorities. So far, no one has been reported injured. Well, our weekly panel is next. Students struggling, the basics becoming all too hard. We'll discuss the latest NAPLAN results. Shocking but unsurprising, new data on harassment and violence. What's the fix? And round two for the Fire Festival flop, a pre-sale a sellout? Surely not. And an ill-hatched parent prank at the expense of their kids. Harmless fun or harmful? We'll be back after this. Our students are lagging, with NAPLAN results showing 1 in 3 students failing to meet literacy and numeracy standards. It's drastically worse in remote areas where fewer than 30% of students had strong or exceeding scores. The Education Minister admits serious reform is needed, while the opposition has called it a, quote, national embarrassment. Let's bring in our panellists, author and journalist Caroline Overington, along with marketing expert and Labor strategist Dee Madigan. Welcome, ladies. Caroline, there was record funding in education last year, $72 billion from all levels of government. Should we be earmarking more of this cash for the most disadvantaged schools?
You know, I'm not entirely convinced by the value of the NAPLAN test, and I know that a lot of Australian parents aren't really. It used to be that your teacher had a good idea how well your student was doing. Now they're trying to benchmark them against all these international students on a whole range of different factors. It seems to me that it worked better when you had a class teacher who was empowered to teach things like maths and English, and you learnt your times tables and you learnt how to read with phonics, rather than this system under NAPLAN where you suddenly in year 3 say, oh, by the way, all Australian students are stupid. I mean, what is the value of that actually?
Do you think it affects their confidence as well?
I think the real issue is that 1 in 2 teachers leaves in 5 years. I mean,
is that right?
It's unbelievable. It's up to 50%, I think it is, in New South Wales leave in the first 5 years.
Is that what it is?
and being underpaid.
Right.
Like they're having to do more and more, and they're getting paid not enough. And you're having situations where you've got classes with no teachers over and over and over again. You've got students getting one teacher and then that teacher leaves. You know, the lack of consistency in education, and you know, for every, you know, teachers need to be paid. Everyone needs to be paid.
But also, don't you think that they're made to do a lot of rubbish now? Like, the schools are stacked full of stuff.
Yes.
But even the stuff that you have to do in the class, it isn't about basic building blocks of learning. I think that when we were all children, or perhaps when Dee and I were children, the basic building blocks of learning were put in place in prep and kept up through primary school until you could do things like read and write and add up and do all those kinds of things that make learning easier later on. Whereas now they've got all this extra stuff they have to do that has nothing...
standardise is lowering the bar.
Well, it has nothing to do with learning, all this other stuff that teachers are being made to do.
Let's look at what they are talking about. So an expert panel is looking at what key targets should be tied to funding as part of the next National School Reform Agreement. Dee, how do we bridge the gap between city and rural schools?
Well, this is kind of why NAPLAN started in the first place, which was to identify the schools that weren't doing well, so they got more funding, which is essentially not a bad way of doing it, except for the extra stress it puts on not just students but also on teachers as well, because their schools are sort of wanting the school to do well, because then you attract other students, and private schools do that, you know, particularly. So, but there's no doubt that I think what we should be doing is offering students who do teaching degrees HECS free if they go to a regional area for 4 or 5 years.
Like they do that with doctors. If doctors go to rural hospitals, they get a bit of a break on their fees.
And then what happens is you end up embedding into the community, you find a partner there, and it's actually a really nice way of bringing, I think, people from the city out to the country anyway, and I think that would be a really good start.
And hopefully the salaries go a bit further.
They have to get higher.
Let's move on and look at some other numbers which are not very appealing. Disturbing new data has revealed how many Australians are dealing with harassment or violence. Now, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, an estimated 7 million of us, that's 36%, have experienced the occurrence, attempt or threat of physical assault since the age of 15. For both men and women, the perpetrator was 3 times more likely to be a man. The Personal Safety Survey also found 1 in 5 women suffered sexual violence in that same time frame. 1.7 million Australians, or 8.7%, faced sexual harassment between 2021 and 2022. Caroline, do these figures surprise you, the prevalence?
No, it didn't. I can't say that it surprised me. I think it might surprise some men.
Yeah, every woman would be like, well, yes.
Obviously. I actually thought that some of those figures were quite low. I mean, 8% of women have suffered sexual harassment. I think it's got to be a lot higher than that. I mean, your daily life as a woman can be one of being harassed in that regard. The question is, what do we do about it? And I think a lot of work has been done, particularly in the last few years. Women have been really active on things like consent and trying to teach teenagers in particular the difference between a woman saying yes enthusiastically to whatever it is that's going on and perhaps assuming that she might want what is happening. So I think we're doing it.
I see that for me is the most worrying thing is that so much work has been done in the last couple of years in terms of educating people, but the numbers haven't really changed, and that sort of makes me think, well, what's going on there?
And it's the violence that's really troubling. I mean, sexual harassment is kind of a low-grade annoyance, I guess, and a lot of women, sort of learn how to bat it away and deal with it. They shouldn't have to, but they do. But the level of violence against women is really shocking.
Let's talk about some of those harassment numbers. Women experience the majority of sexual harassing cases, unsurprising for what we just heard, with 500,000 receiving an indecent text, email or post, 400,000 impacted by unwanted touching or grabbing. Dee, how safe do you feel hearing those statistics?
Well, again, the statistics don't surprise me because we live it. I mean, I would have had 4 dick pics last year completely unsolicited.
Really?
Yeah.
Like because you're on social media and so people... Yeah, OK.
Which is a weird thing because I've got to say, they're not attractive as an appendage, you know? I say this as a straight man.
Actually, social media has made the problem worse because when you are online as a woman, you do tend to get things... People will say quite outrageous things like, I want to rape you or you should be killed, things like that they would never, I think, say to you in person.
They're anonymous often as well.
Right.
But it's also just your life. Like, so I travel a lot and you go and stay in hotels and you think at night time, gee, it'd be nice to go for a run. And I don't think blokes realise, for us, it's actually just not an option.
Yeah,
and you just consciously, even when you're walking late at night, you're just a little bit more aware. I feel like guys go, why are women so angry? It's like, oh, just live our life for a little bit.
I feel it's even in broad daylight. If I feel someone come up very close to me, I'm immediately on guard and wondering if it's intentional or if it's an accident. It could be completely innocent, but you are just alert. So what do we do?
It's like we live in different worlds, isn't it? That men and women live in completely different worlds when it comes to how safe you feel in public spaces. But I recall those campaigns even from the 1980s about, reclaim the night, that kind of thing.
Say no.
But actually, things have not changed that much.
So what do we do? How do we change it?
Look, we keep talking about it, but we just need to fight back against... Every time it gets brought up, you get the... But men are victims too, and it's like it's not saying they're not. We need to stop people hijacking the debate and let guys... Like, we're not saying all men, but for them to own up that it is predominantly men who are perpetrators.
Let's move on to something that's arguably a little lighter, but arguably not. There's a viral new prank which is tonight drawing anger. The TikTok trend involves parents filming themselves cracking an egg on their toddlers' heads after telling them they'd do it in a pan or a bowl. Let's take a look at this.
Wow. That hurts. Are you okay? No. Ready? Yeah. Two? Stop. What the hell? I thought you got some in my...
Medical experts warn the stunt could leave a bruise on a child's head, plus they could be learning that hitting someone is acceptable. Caroline, what's your instant reaction to this? Is this bullying?
I don't know if it's bullying. I found it a strange thing to do. Like, why would you deliberately upset your child? Like, I mean, it's not, to me, it wasn't funny. Was it fun? Did you think it was funny?
Not at all.
No, I'm sort of person, but I know parents who, you know, would scare their children, go boo, and I could never do that. I couldn't do that.
I could do that. No, I could jump out from behind the door and say boo, no problem.
Couldn't do that. I think it's awful. Oh, look, I you know, have a laugh with my kids and I'll make fun of them and they'll make fun of me, but this is what you're doing is sort of surprising them in a bad way, and you're the person they trust most. I don't get it.
They're also sponges at that age. Yeah. Everything you do, they copy and follow.
Of course. So then
day two at daycare, there they are doing.
Exactly right. Then what we'll see now is kids doing that kind of thing at school because it's okay at home, and then we'll have another pandemic of violence against children at school. So it did seem really odd to be laughing about the fact that your child is really distressed, that you've upset your child, and you're laughing about it.
And it's competitive. Like,
it's competitive. That's right. And you are showing the whole world. You're inviting the world to laugh at your child's distress.
It's horrible.
So does it just show how desperate people are for social media attention?
Absolutely. And I reckon there's something with this whole dopamine hits about this addiction that's going around that we haven't really fully really explored, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next sort of 20 years about that.
Let's move on to the final topic, which is also baffling. So who here remembers the extraordinary Fire Festival, which tonight convicted con artist Billy McFarland is promising to reboot it using influencers for marketing. The luxury music event drew thousands of people to the Bahamas in 2017, who only then discovered it was a total flop. It was compared to Lord of the Flies or the Hunger Games, with shocking accommodation, food and water. The fraudulent organiser spent nearly 4 years behind bars, saying he devised the new version of the festival while in solitary confinement. McFarland claims the first round of 100 tickets had sold out for $499 a pop. Caroline, there is no lineup. There are no dates. There is no location. What am I missing?
Well, I cannot believe that any number of people actually are still prepared to give this guy their money. Although the first time round, I think it was $12,000 a ticket. But also the detail is just divine. He announced his plan while wearing a silk bathrobe. And then, as you say, he came up with the idea while he was in prison. I mean, there are so many warning signs here.
I love it. And he's also like, I'm going to spend some of my time making TV shows. And so partly I think, you wanker, get a job. But partly I'm like, no, I want him to do this. I want to watch the kind of people who think this is
Did you watch the first one? It was absolutely hilarious.
So good.
It was absolutely... All these people who had turned up expecting to find supermodels and rock stars, and what they found was they got a soggy cheese sandwich.
No water.
There was no water. And they were basically in a car park, and there was nothing happening. They paid $12,000.
It was kind of glorious.
And it's kind of nice to see people losing touch with reality in that way.
But should regulators be involved, or is it buyer beware?
I feel like I'm okay with buyer beware in this case, because anyone who's that stupid really deserves to lose everything. The only thing I hope that last time a whole lot of staff and that didn't get paid, that's not okay. So, but I suspect most people aren't putting up their hand to work for him.
Oh, I imagine not. Well, Caroline Overington and Dee Madigan, thanks so much for your time this evening.
So much fun.
Yeah.
You can join in the conversation by jumping online and heading to our social media pages. Tomorrow's weather forecast and the final frame are next. Time for a check of tomorrow's weather forecast across the country. Beginning in Brisbane tonight, set for a mostly sunny day, a top of 25 degrees. An overcast one for Sydney. Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart will be partly cloudy. Clear conditions for Adelaide, Perth reaching 21. And in Darwin, a scorcher, 34 and sunny. In our regions, a warm one for Rockhampton, 25 and sunny in Moree. Shepparton expecting grey skies and showers, and 15 for Launceston. Tonight's final frame is a miracle in Maui. This home, the only one left standing. As the rest of Lahaina was reduced to rubble, it was left virtually unscathed. The couple that owns it was on holidays when wildfires took hold. It's entirely made of wood, so they braced to lose it all. But to their surprise, the 100-year-old property survived. They're not sure what saved it, but plan to offer it up to others who lost their properties when it's safe to return. A symbol of hope, our final frame. Thank you for your company this Wednesday from the team that is The Latest. I'm Gemma Acton. Good night.